Welcome to Live with the League. I'm Emily Kalashewski, Assistant Director for Member Experience and Learning here at the League. Today, we're checking in with a couple of members of our state and federal affairs team on several issues moving at the Capitol that could have some significant impacts on local governments. Joining me, we've got John Lamacchia and Harrisana Richards. We'll be talking about the state budget process, property tax reform discussions, housing legislation, and septic system legislation. If you're watching live, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll answer as many as we can. Let's get right into it. John, I want to start with the state budget. It's been a conversation that continues. There's still a lot of uncertainty around where things stand. So, what can you tell us about where the budget currently sits?
Yeah, great question, Emily. It really ebbs and flows by day.
Yeah.
And I say that knowing a couple of weeks ago, prior to the Mackinac Policy Conference, there was a lot of conversation about conversations taking place. And I think that was maybe overstated a little bit. Our experience on the island and talking with both legislators and staff would suggest that was maybe moving a little slower than what was being discussed in the public. And coming back from the policy conference last week, we thought maybe some things would get going, but again, relatively quiet on that front. And I'm not suggesting
Mhm.
that's a bad thing. I'm just suggesting that as these things come together, the what is actually happening versus what the headlines may read are generally two different things. Now, we're hopeful that some conversations are going to take place this week at what we would refer to as the subcommittee level. So the subcommittee chairs of things like general government, where revenue sharing is, or transportation, or labor and economic opportunity. Hopefully, those subcommittee chairs, both in the House and Senate, will be getting together. They have not been delivered targets yet, which is the number provided by leadership in the administration that is agreed upon for how much can be spent in each of those individual budgets, but hopefully soon. I think what we did see last week is two, I'll say, really important things. And they were both indications of where the negotiations stand based on particular topics set out by the speaker. And one
Mm.
is on property tax reform, and the other is on literacy or third grade reading, really as things that, in his opinion, need to be included in that budget negotiation for them to move forward.
And so, as we're talking about how this process moves forward, I'm curious what you can tell us about what are our main priorities as these negotiations continue? What are you keeping your eye on as you're hearing
Yeah.
these conversations?
Yeah. Number one thing for us is going to be revenue sharing. And for a couple of reasons, right? One, from just a true statutory standpoint, the House has actually proposed about a $66 million increase to statutory revenue sharing. And a lot of that has to do with the fact in the road funding proposal last year, we know that constitutional is down because of the change in which we no longer charge sales tax at the pump.
Hmm.
The Senate's a very different proposal where they keep statutory revenue sharing flat, but they have included our number one legislative priority of the revenue sharing trust fund.
Hmm.
And then the governor proposed just a flat, no revenue sharing trust fund, no increase, just a flat statutory number. And we may wonder, was that good or is that bad? From where
Yeah.
we sit, that's actually not a bad thing. And I say that because one, you see a revenue increase on one hand, you see the trust fund on the other hand. That means that conversation has to take place at the negotiating table. They can't just kind of gloss it over as they have maybe in previous years where everybody said, hey, we'll give them 3% and we'll move on. Right now, they have to have a serious budget discussion, both on the resource amount and the policy, which is exactly what we want to have happen from a staff perspective, because then that means our number one priority and the resources that it delivers become a very important topic and a must negotiate topic at the table.
And so, as our officials are tuning in and thinking about what they should be watching over the next few weeks, what would you recommend to them?
Yeah, that's a little bit harder, right? Because as I had led with, sometimes the headlines are a little deceiving. But I do
Right?
think what we should be paying attention to more than anything else is if we hear that the principals, so the governor's office, the Senate Appropriations Chair and the House Appropriations Chair and their respective leaders, the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, are actually in the room talking.
Hmm.
If they are in the room talking, then we know that that is a good sign for getting this thing moving forward. And I will say that the sense in Lansing, right, is that people want to get it done by July 1,
Yeah.
both for practical policy reasons and quite frankly for political reasons too.
Sure.
How those two things come together is anybody's guess right now, because as usual, there's a lot of big things to work out. And the latest consensus revenue estimating conference would suggest that there's also a shortfall.
Mm.
Depending on who you talk to, it appears that they're about $400 million short in the budget projections right now. How you get to a negotiated deal on that is going to be a challenge.
Thanks, John. I do want to turn to property tax reform because that continues to be a major topic of discussion. Where are we at with this? What can you tell our members?
Yeah, there was a significant movement about 2.5 weeks ago in the House.
You've been busy,
So
John. I'll just say that. It's been a
we
busy time.
we we have been busy, and I love every single second of it.
We can tell. We love that for
Yeah.
us.
Uh, so the as we've talked about before, the House Republicans have put out a property tax reform package that included things like eliminating the pop-up or the uncapping of property taxes, eliminated the state education tax, the state real estate transfer tax, eliminated all of the remaining personal property tax, which goes, to local government. Um, and then proposed having a sales tax on services to make up for the revenue loss. Now, total package would encumber, or excuse me, would deal with about $5.5 billion in reduction in property taxes paid either by individuals or businesses. And so you would have to raise $5.5 billion out of a sales tax on services in which to make up for that. Now, they passed all of the policy bills out of the House. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But they did not bring forward the revenue replacement bill. And we
Hmm.
haven't seen any indication of what items would be charged a sales tax on services to actually get to that $5.5 billion. And so there are a lot of people in town that remain skeptical of how you actually do that. And I think that was shown in the vote the other day because it really ended up being party lines. And
Hmm.
so we saw all of the Democrats vote against it, and one Republican, Jamie Green, who's a former elected official
Yep.
out of Southeast Michigan, and has actually put together some really thoughtful words on why she voted no. And a lot of that came back down to, well, how are we going to backfill resources to local government and
Yep.
ensure that they can continue to provide the services that residents expect? Now, not only was that a good sign where you saw it go on party lines, the reception by the Senate has been relatively cool to it as
Mm.
well.
Mhm.
That does not mean they're not interested in having a conversation around property tax reform. I think people, generally speaking, want to have that. It is a major topic for individuals of all political spectrums at this particular moment in time. The approach, though, that the Senate Republicans have taken has not been well received to this point. It doesn't mean it won't be a part of the final negotiated deal, but without the revenue source, it becomes much more difficult for people to react to it in a very real way because you don't know if or when or how you may be held harmless in that negotiated deal or that proposed deal.
Right. Well, I'm curious if this opens up another avenue for us, right? While it might not be something that we are in support of at this point with how it stands, how does this open up opportunities for us to talk about the reforms that we
Yeah.
would see as a solution to this?
Yeah. Well, while we might not be supportive of the individual pieces that have moved so far, the
Right.
idea that we can have a conversation in this space, which is one that we've wanted to have for years now. Many of you may remember our conversation around Save by City and talking about the broken municipal finance system and all of the issues that arise out there. And one of the things that actually happened is State Rep Regina Weiss and a few others put in some alternative property tax reform bills, and one of those bills is one of the big priority legislative items that we have, which is reinstating Headley roll-ups and then also decoupling the millage reduction fraction from the uncapping or the pop-up. And so to see that bill out there in a very real way again this session, and knowing that it may be something that makes its way into the negotiation at the end of the day if they decide to include this as part of the budget, is something that, to your point, Emily, we look at as an opportunity, right?
Hmm.
So knowing that there's big differences between support and opposition here, how do you find that middle ground? We do see that piece of legislation as being some potential form of middle ground as a way in which to stabilize local resources, depending on what else they do in this space.
So obviously it's a topic we continue to monitor. It's a topic that we've talked about for years. So, what should we be thinking about? And is there anything we're asking our members to do right now
Yeah.
about this issue?
Yeah, it's a good question in the sense that we've asked our members to do a lot, right? Put a lot of
Yeah,
pressure on housing, support the revenue sharing trust fund. Now we have this major property tax reform proposal out there that would, if passed as it is, upend local budgets across the state.
yeah.
That being said, I think what we need to continue to do, which we've done a great job as of late, is to continue to highlight the way in which those resources deliver services and the value that's associated with it. On top of that, any property tax reform proposal that's out there must allow for a 100% replacement mechanism. Right
Hmm.
now, that can look and act in many different ways, but to leave local governments holding the bag at the end of the day and to continue to ask them to do more with less when those same service demands exist, the same cost pressures around inflation and material and other things exist for us, or even the fact that our healthcare costs are going up, right? We need to make sure that we have a solution that not only provides some relief, but also make sure that we have our resources protected. And that is a lot of what people are talking about in Lansing. And to the speaker's credit, he has talked about that, right? And
Right.
I'm not suggesting in any way that the House Republicans don't want to replace revenue. It's more of making sure that they identify how, exactly what's included in it, and exactly how those resources will be delivered to local government at the end of the day, if we were ever to get to a point where we could support some of the things that are going on.
Thanks, John. So property tax, one to watch and one we'll continue to keep you all updated on as it evolves. I want to move to another issue that we have been talking about a lot recently. If you haven't heard, you must be living under a rock. We're talking about housing. So, John, where do things currently stand in terms of the housing policy landscape, and what should our members know?
Yeah, generally, I'd like to turn this conversation over to Jen at this point. But Jen is actually, as we speak, down in the city of Detroit at the SEMCOG offices,
Hmm.
doing a lunch and learn with several different staff members and professionals in the zoning space and in the infrastructure space and in the planning space, with legislators from Southeast Michigan, explaining to them exactly what zoning is, how planning interacts with that, and then how that interacts with these pieces of legislation that would preempt our authority in particular places when it comes to housing. While that seems very elementary, right, we have to remember that legislators don't always deal with these issues. That's not their fault, right? I mean, they come from different professional backgrounds, different careers before this, different committees they sit on in the legislature today. So we continue to educate, and I can't underscore the importance of that in this particular moment. As much as we want to talk about opposition to the bills out there that would preempt local authority, we also have to tell people why and how we utilize zoning, why
Mm.
planning and master plans are so critical to how we develop as communities, and then how that plays into our infrastructure systems. And so that is what Jen is actually doing today, as we sit here on this meeting. I can tell you those conversations are making a difference in Lansing. Okay. And we continue to talk about the fact that it's not just about saying no to these bills, right? But it's also about saying we do have another plan in the MI Home program that does think about thoughtful zoning reforms, couples that with resources to develop attainable housing, and then make sure that it has a long lasting impact at the end of the day by leveraging those resources, not just now, but really in perpetuity through a revolving loan fund. Um, Again, difficult when it's asking for resources and in tight budgets. But if that's a priority and housing's a priority, then let's act like it. And that's why we think there's still an opportunity to make sure that we can talk about this in a reasonable manner, talk about the unintended consequences of preemption, And legislators, I think, are understanding that. Now, where we land at the end of the day still continues to be anybody's guess. We had thought maybe there would be another hearing on the bills this week, and currently there is not. And the committee that it's in, House Government Operations, has posted, but not with these bills on the agenda. But we need to continue to remain vigilant. I know many of our communities have adopted resolutions in opposition. We would encourage you to continue to do that and continue to reach out to your legislator, because as we think about between now and the end of June, it's really some of the most important and critical weeks that we have in front of us to ensure that this doesn't become a negotiating tool and tactic for people, and that we're able to make sure that any movement is based on the merits of the policy, not somebody trying to acquire votes to pass a budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned this earlier that we've been asking our members to do a lot lately, and they've shown up, and the fight isn't over. So, what for those who might not have been able to be with us for some of those events and feel that in person, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most impressive things that I've seen here in my time is actually our member engagement over the last probably 4 to 5 months on this.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the main reason why I think we've been successful in holding it off. And I don't mean holding it off as if we're just convincing people that it's not good. We've actually been giving them real, tangible examples of what the consequences of this legislation would be. And legislators are listening to that. I can speak very directly to a conversation that I had with a legislator last week that I think is changing their position to some degree as a result of not just the education we've been doing, but quite frankly, the way the local officials in this member's district have been talking to them. That is where we are seeing the real impact. So there's a lot of opportunity, particularly as the weather warms up. Maybe there's more parades, there's all kinds of different things going up. Make sure you take the time to check in with them, to respond if they have questions, to give them good examples of the great work that we're doing in our communities around building more housing, so they can see the tangible results. Right? We shouldn't be afraid to sort of trumpet our successes in this space.
Hmm.
While there still may be challenges, of course, whether that's because financing's hard or it's tough to close a deal or the numbers just simply aren't penciling. But that is why we have the MI Home program out there as an example, to say there are ways in which we could do this better. There are ways in which we could still have thoughtful zoning reform. But at the end of the day, our success is going to be based on our continued activity. I can promise you, you're going to hear that not just on this one, but probably the next one and all the way through the end of December, if this
Yeah.
continues. But that is the type of issue this one is right now.
Absolutely. Not one that we can take our foot off the gas on at all. So you will continue to hear us talk about housing as one of our top issues when you join us for Live with the Leagues throughout the rest of this year, I'm sure. Thanks, John. All right, I want to say a big, healthy welcome back to Harrisana, who is joining us today for Live with the League. It's a delight to have you here. Harrisana, you're here to talk about the septic bills. So, what can you tell us? Give us an overview first for folks who are new to them.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you, Emily. It's great to be back. Something that also is background is septic code. So this is one that we have been talking about for several sessions over the past several years. Fun fact, Michigan, of course, is the last state to have, the only state that does not have a statewide septic code, which puts us in the position of having a lot of different, protocols and procedures across the state. The plus side of this is that, our local communities know what they've been doing. We have a lot of strong septic programs across the state that have been locally operated and administered. And so in the conversations and when we've been talking about creating a statewide septic code, we've been very adamant about elevating that. But we recognize that we are a Great Lakes state and a lot of people taking advantage of natural water resources. And so it is a priority for us, for our communities, to ensure that the water that people get is safe, it's healthy. We have proper procedures in place in order to ensure that that's happening. So we have been in work group conversations for several years of the leadership of Senator Singh, who is now in his last year in the legislature, in the Michigan Senate. And he has been a champion for establishing a statewide policy on this. We have been in partnership with other partners in local government, the townships, the counties, the realtors, business owners, lots of different industries and entities that all rely on this. A new partner in this have been the local health departments, which I think has been a really great partner to include in this conversation, because it is really really highlighted how these programs have been administered locally. What are the needs and the challenges, especially when we work in collaboration with health departments at the local level. And now with this policy, what we are going to see is a statewide septic code, but with the administration of local partners in our health departments. And then also the opportunity that if we as local governments have ordinances in place that are just as stringent as state law, we're able to keep those in place and continue working from that maneuver. But there's been action on this. So Senator Singh, like I mentioned, has been working on this legislative package for a very long time. Just last week, we had a hearing in the Senate for an S2 substitute, which was put together with continued feedback from work group partners. That passed the committee and now is moved to the committee of the whole. And this is where I would say, manage your optimism. We are looking at two completely different chambers with the Senate versus the House. Again, the Senate Dem controlled, so a lot of those priorities around the environment, natural resources, water consumption and usage are, still moving with heavy momentum. What we see now is that, we can anticipate these bills moving through the Senate, but as we get to the House, that momentum might be slower. Not saying that's impossible, but it might be something that we see in lame duck that might be something that will change very quickly and move really fast. Similar, to other things, or it also could not move at all. But what I will say about that is that this is the first time where we as an organization have gotten to a place where we're very comfortable with where these bills are. We feel that it recognizes that there are local processes in place. It helps with that. At the same time, recognizing we do need a statewide system. The one piece that we are still looking for, but Senator Singh has acknowledged that he's willing to work towards, is a funding mechanism. There's revenue that would be collected through fines and fees to help local communities if they need to transition to full wastewater or need to do any corrections. But we would like to see that fund funded without just fines and fees, having some money to go with through a budget process that's also reliable. So it's not contingent on somebody falling short in order to have revenue to do what we need. That's a very high level of what we have in these bills. Again, progress because we've been part of this work group conversation, and we really do thank Senator Singh for his attention to this and engaging us in the process along the way.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that update, Harisana. All right, before we formally close out, John, Harisana, anything else that we want to make sure our local officials keep on their radar as we head into the summer?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple of things. We have these major topics out there, right? Housing, property tax reform, state budget right now. And Harisana just got done talking about septic, right? Which is statewide code. So it impacts people in a lot of different ways. There's actually a lot of movement right now on some smaller stuff that we are tracking. So I don't want to make it sound like this is all the legislature's working on.
Right.
But part of that is a lot of positioning right now. I think you're going to see some bills move prior to summer break in the hopes that if there is an active, maybe early fall or a potentially active lame duck, that bills are in a position to do that. And so there are a few things that we are following and tracking. One I'll just mention specifically, Emily, which is a bill dealing with video franchise fees that I know a lot of members have engaged on. And that bill in particular had a hearing last week and the week before. We anticipate that bill may get a vote in the House and likely to pass the House here in its current form. Some language has been added in which to try to protect municipal revenue from what we would term as maybe more of an incumbent provider. So the provider that actually owns the infrastructure in the right of way versus the streamer who's just utilizing that infrastructure in the right of way. But this is a very complicated, a little bit messy right now issue, and one that has some long-standing tenets within our community as it comes to the resources provided by franchise fees. We know those resources are declining as people cut the cord, as they would say, but transition to more streaming platforms. One of the positives I want to give you about this conversation, there's been a lot of talk about modernizing the system. Now, what that means to different entities is going to be slightly different. But the idea that people are starting to recognize that we don't live in a traditional cable provider world anymore, and that people procure their entertainment, digitally in a lot of different ways. And those are packaged and bundled and all kinds of things. But I do think what we are setting ourselves up for is a potential conversation around that. Doesn't change our position of opposition on that legislation right now. We're going to continue to try to educate legislators to understand those ramifications. But I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because I know that's a big, big issue for many people out there right now that are tracking and watching this issue And just because we haven't talked about that, or maybe even a couple of others, doesn't mean we're not watching those.
Yep.
So if you got questions on other pieces, something we didn't mention here today, you're always welcome to reach out to myself, Harrison, Dave, or Jen. We're more than happy to talk to you about that.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Harisana, anything to add?
Yeah, nothing.
No. Awesome. Okay. Well, before we formally close out today, just one quick reminder that yes, we are all enjoying our summer. Finally, it's here. But keep MML Convention on your radar. That is coming up October 7th through 9th at Grand Traverse Resort. So we hope to see you in Traverse City. With that, that's all we've got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Live with the League. Have a great week.